Like, you can't bring race and sexuality into a fantasy story. It doesn't work, and there's not a known story where it does work. And I was like, excuse me? Don't tell me what I can't do, one. And two, excuse me? Hi, Gems. How are you? How are things going for you? You're looking good. You're looking great. Looking gorgeous. Looking like a whole snack. And I'm so proud of you for it. My name is Chelsey, and welcome to yet another BookTube video. As you can see, things are looking a little different in my neck of the woods, and that is because we are trying something a little different over here in my neck of the woods. Today we are going to be doing something that I am placeholder-y calling Manuscripts, where I'm going to be doing my fingernails while telling you guys a crazy-ish, wacky-ish story. So we are currently, in this year of our Lord 2020, under a pandemic, and I can't go out and get my nails done because it is not safe. It's not safe and it's dangerous, and I'm not gonna put my family at risk like that. Not to get my nails done, not to be looking cute, but I still want to look cute. So I have taken on doing dip powder nails while I have been staying at home. I have been doing this for months. I am in no way, shape, or form a nail technician. I don't have a certification. I only have experience through YouTube. And I, like I said, have been doing this for a couple months now, and my nails look decent enough to, you know, show on camera and go to work with. So that is how I have been getting along and how I have been avoiding looking raggedy. So it's time again for me to be doing my nails. So I figured, what is a better way to be doing my nails than to do them on camera while telling you guys a story? So that's where we are at. That's what we're doing now. Grab a snack, grab a drink, go ahead and sit down in your favorite comfy chair, because I am going to be telling you guys the story of my college experience with a professor who told me that my writing is not possible, even though today we have books that are being published similar to my writing, and his writing is trash. So let's get started. So when I got to college, I thought, hey, I'm gonna continue working on novels, and I had this great delusion in my head of like, yeah, you're gonna keep writing, and you're gonna keep on writing books, and you're gonna publish books while you're in college, and you're gonna be this great author by the time you graduate from college. I was 18 and I did not understand the reality of the situation, and that's okay. So I go to college, I get in, and I'm so excited. I wouldn't trade my college experience for the world, don't get me wrong. But I will say that for me, my writing, I feel like it did like stagnate in college. When I was in college, I didn't get the opportunity to write a lot of the books that I really wanted to write, a lot of the stories I really wanted to write. Because when you're in college, a lot of the stories that they demand for you to write are short stories. And I'm a novel writer. And there are some writers who are amazing and they can handle all aspects of the craft, and they are also witches. They should also be asked what are the potions to maintain youth and fertility, because they are amazing witches and they have all sorts of magical spells that they are not willing to share with the rest of us. But for me, I'm not a short story writer, so I really struggled in college to write the stories that were demanded of me. But also in college, I felt like my writing was stifled because I wasn't writing the fantasy stories I wanted to write. I wasn't writing the Black fantasy stories I wanted to write. While I was studying abroad in England, this was my senior year, I did a lot of exploring of myself in my writing. And I think a lot of like my best pieces that I've ever written, or I've written so far, I should say, came from that time in England where I had that freedom to express myself and find myself and figure myself out. So I wrote this one story that was about a bunch of lesbian mermaids, and it was really, I will never forget what my professor wrote about that story. My professor from England wrote about that story. They said, and I quote, that this story really decolonizes magic. I don't know why, but that line, it was in my Twitter bio for like ever. Decolonizer of magic, like that really spoke to me. It was when my professor called me the decolonizer of magic that I was like, I had this epiphany like you see in the movies where it's like, oh, I figured it out. I was like, yes, that's what I want to do. I want to write these stories that aren't just like good stories that like make you feel good, that are like just quality storytelling, but I want to write books that are like, oh my god, like, yes, that makes sense. Like, yes, Black people should also be like, you know, mermaids and vampires and werewolves, and they should also be doing all of these things. But like with that line, I was just like, yes, that's it. I want to write stories where, you know, it's not just like magical creatures, but it's also like magical creatures who are also like gay or Black or what have you, trans, all of these things. So I was like, cool, I'm gonna go back to school and we're gonna make this happen. We're going to write these stories. I'm back from England and it is now my last semester of my senior year. So this professor was like my writing advisor, as well as my like, you know, professor of a lot of classes that I had. Great. And this professor, like, he did a lot of poetry classes and a lot of things like that, and he also like wrote books himself. But like his books and the books that he enjoyed were never something I was interested in, but hey, you know, whatever. There's something about how he went about like teaching us, like from a writing perspective, that like messed with me. So senior year, I take his novel writing class, because finally they offer a novel writing class, and I'm like, yay, let me take this novel writing class, and you know, as one last hurrah, it's my final year, let me take this class and, you know, get some novel writing experience. Woot. So he's teaching. Good old prof. And, you know, he's teaching all of these, and a lot of people are writing like cool stories. Like one person wrote a story from the perspective of a caveman. Who fucking thinks of that shit? That's amazing. I, at one point in this class, wrote a story about like a dragon shifter, I think, who was also experiencing like racism or something like that. And they called her like a racial slur along with like calling her a lizard, and like I was like, yes. I had to write the story for a homework assignment, so I wasn't thinking really deep into it. I just wanted to write a story about a dragon shifter and go about my way. I mean, someone wrote a story about a caveman. A dragon shifter is not too far of a leap in this class. And I turned in this assignment, and you know, we're talking about our stories in class, and everyone's talking about how interesting my story is, how like interesting it is to have a thought experiment about like how if different species of human existed, would there still be like racism, and like would there still be speciesism? Obviously my thesis argument was yes, of course there would be, because we're human. What up? And I will never forget this. In a class full of people, he was like, you know, I don't think this story works. And everyone's like, all right, we'll bite. What do you mean by that, prof? And he was like, you can't have a story that has racism and speciesism in here. You can't write a fantasy story that is told from the perspective of a person of a different race. Like, you can't bring race and sexuality into a fantasy story. It doesn't work, and there's not a known story where it does work. And I was like, excuse me? Don't tell me what I can't do, one. And two, excuse me? From there, you know, everyone in the class is like, we're all like, excuse us? And he goes off and begins to explain his argument even further and dig himself even more into this hole. This is a hill he is willing to die on, because it's a terrible, shitty hill. He continues and says, you know, if we're going to talk about the other, then we need to look at stories with the other. Because you can talk about, like, othering, like racism and homophobia and all of these things, without actually directly referencing those as characters. Use it as an allegory, as a metaphor. You know, if you want to other a character, or you want to like talk about like racism and homophobia and like all of these things, well, make it into an allegory, make it into a metaphor. Make it so like elves are the metaphor for like racism, and that fairies are a metaphor for homophobia, and like shifters are a metaphor for transphobia. This makes sense. Like, do that. So many popular forms of literature and media have done this. Look at Star Trek. Look at Star Wars. Look at Harry Potter. There weren't any like black people in there, and like race wasn't at the forefront. Like, gay sexuality wasn't at the forefront of these stories. Sure, Jan. Like, let's like pull over for a second and let's dive into like why this is shitty criticism and why you shouldn't say this to somebody who is black, a female, and like a lesbian, who is every shade of otherness that is out there in literature. Let's pull over and talk about this. Go on this journey with me. Let's take a ride. So, you don't say this sort of thing to somebody who is the other, because it is this thing called a racist, words are hard. A racist, am I trying to say Worcestershire? I can say that. Oh god. It is erasing people. It is erasing people's actual existence and their actual meaning. And it is shitty representation. You don't make people into an allegory or a metaphor, because like people aren't allegories and metaphors. People are real. I remember he said, well, the X-Men did it. It was like a metaphor for the civil rights movement. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about how problematic it is that like a metaphor for the civil rights movement is full of white people at the center stage with like one black person who is Storm, who's like shrugged off most of the story. What? Like, why don't you just tell the story of the civil rights movement using people who are in the civil rights movement? Like, if you're gonna tell the story of the other, why don't you tell it from the perspective of the other? What's the point in drowning the other in like allegory and metaphor? And what's the point of putting the other backstage behind a mask of whiteness? why do that? What are we talking about? If you want to tell the story of the other, you put the other on center stage. You give them that representation. You give them that chance to be in the spotlight. You let them tell their story. And he was like, well, I just don't think that, like, you know, you should put fantasy and race and sexuality and sexism and all of these things into a story because it muddies the story. And no popular form of media has ever done it before. Really? Because Octavia Butler doesn't exist. Okay. Sure. Erasure at its finest. I think I finally said that word right. Lately I've been reading Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. And 1, this book is amazing. And 2, this book features a Black lesbian as the protagonist, and you know that she's a lesbian. It's literally like the 2nd or 3rd sentence in the book. You know she's a lesbian. There's no hiding it. There's no like hiding behind it. Like, you know what this book is. And it's a modern retelling of a fairy tale that literally excludes us. And yeah, like, I've heard people say, like, Cinderella isn't a story about race, and, like, everyone can see themselves as Cinderella. And, like, what are we even talking about? It's not a story about race. Stop making everything about race. I don't care. Cinderella is Dead is so good in the fact of, I am not even halfway through it and I'm already in love with this book, but it's so good because, like, it talks about how, like, gay people don't see themselves in this book. They don't see themselves in this fairy tale because we're not, I guess, supposed to find our happily ever after. I talked about this in my Felix Ever After video, just like we need more stories where we find our happily ever after and don't go through struggles. Cinderella is Dead. So good. Sophia isn't buried under some metaphor about, like, you know, gays not being a part of, like, fairy tales or something. Like, she's not like a fucking gnome or something and being like, I'm not a part of this fairy tale and I don't see myself in it. No, she's a Black lesbian who dresses as a beautiful princess and she just wants to be with her girlfriend. And that's all she wants. It's just, it's so good. It's not even that, like, Cinderella is Dead is the only story that does this. It's not. Like, there are other stories too that, like, don't make this whole thing into some sort of metaphor, right? I have books literally right here that do this. Song Below Water is Black lesbian sirens. The Mermaid and the Witch in the Sea, lesbian pirates. Like, Midnight Lie, lesbian thieves. Who I think steal magic? I don't actually know. I've just heard a lot about that book on Twitter. If we had shifters and paranormal creatures and supernatural creatures and all of these things, there would be no racism. There would be no sexism. It would all disappear, right? Because, like, we have superpowered creatures and, like, that's the cure for, like, you know, prejudice and discrimination is, like, insert vampires and werewolves and suddenly, like, we have bigger problems to worry about. No. Like, we have a whole ass pandemic and guess what's still happening? Racism, transphobia, homophobia, sexism. Like, in the video game The Last of Us, which I almost thought about making a video rant about because it was so terrible, but, like, in it, they have a whole zombie apocalypse, and guess what is still exists? As we're trying to survive, trying to live through clickers and, like, other zombie creatures, guess what still exists? Transphobia, homophobia, bigotry. There's a lot of problems with that game, but, like, that still exists, and that's real. It's honestly a laughable notion. I think it's hilarious. I mean, just imagine, like, one day, you know, we all wake up and we're like, vampires. Every human being is a vampire or some shit, right? And we're still like black and gay or trans or non-binary or whatever. And suddenly, you know, we all wake up and we're vampires, and like somebody who like hates like every member of the LGBT community, who's like homophobic down to their bones. We're all vampires, and they're just like, well, I no longer homophobe. No, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. Like, that's laughable. It's so unrealistic, it's laughable. Whew, that's funny to me. That is funny to me. Whew. Another thing that's important to add here. We're at the stage right now where it's just like, people need to know that like different sexualities and shit exist. People need to know that like trans people exist, non-binary exist, asexual, aromantic people exist. People who, you know, are tri-spirit or two-spirit, every bit of the LGBT plus community, they need to know that these people and these lives exist. And if you use something like The Other to tell their stories, people aren't going to know about these people's lives. They're just going to know about like the metaphor used. So like you have X-Men with like all of these different mutants and stuff, but like most of them are white. All of the fan favorites are like white, let's be fully honest. Still, the thing about like X-Men is that, again, you can have this world of mutants, but it's not as though like other problems don't go away. Like, you could very, very easily have like a family in X-Men where like they're totally accepting of their kid being a mutant, and they're like, cool, whatever, but like maybe they're not accepting of the kid being trans. You know, maybe the black mutant experiences racism and speciesism. What would it be for X-Men? What is the ism for it? Whatever. You can experience multiple isms, okay? There's this thing called intersectionality, and I mentioned it in my last video. I mentioned how much of a bitch it is, because intersectionality is literally like when you have more than one marginalized identity that you identify as, and how all of these issues interlace with each other. So a prime example of this is take like pay, right? And how like women get paid less than men do. And it could be like two, like a man and a woman, same position, like same like credentials for the job, went to the same school, same degree, same work experience, the man get paid more than the woman, right? And if you look at those studies, you'll see that like women of color get paid even less. So like you have that intersectionality of woman and also race. And if you're like disabled, rates go down even more. Like intersectionality, it's an amazing thing. So to say that like just because you have supernatural creatures that exist, that like suddenly all the isms and the obias disappear, is to erase the idea of intersectionality and erase the idea that human beings are terrible people. In making this video, my wife brought up a fantastic point. She said, don't make this into a sob story. Don't make this into one of those stories where like, you know, my professor said something mean to me and now I'm like a better writer from it because I went out to prove him wrong. No, that's not what the story's about. And for those people who see this as that kind of story, or who have that as their experience, I'm not downing your experience at all. Like, I'm proud of you. You rose up from the ashes. You proved your doubters wrong. I'm proud of you. You're doing amazing, sweetie. you're fantastic and beautiful and great. For me, this is a story more so about how people believe that these things aren't important and that these things don't matter and that these things don't exist. This is more so that kind of a story. This is that kind of a story about, you know, yes, my professor is dead wrong and I wanted to expand on that and talk about that, but also like there are people who still believe this. There are people whose whole basis of like teaching and talking about literature is talking about how fantasy and sci-fi is all about the other and like all about these metaphors and allegory and like that's high literature and all of these things. Yeah, they're bullshitting. It's wrong. This idea that like highbrow literature means like you can't expand on racial, sexual, all of these different marginalized issues, that's what high literature is ridiculous. I guess the moral of this story isn't that I came out as a better writer because of it. I didn't come out as a better writer on the other side of like, you know, telling the professor that he was wrong. No, I'm still struggling as a writer, and that's due to a lot of different issues, a lot of different anxieties and things of that nature. For me, the moral of the story is what I've been talking about on this channel pretty much the entire time. How important representation is, and how representation gives us a sneak peek into the human condition and how humanity works. And this is a lot of deep shit. This is way deeper than I thought I was gonna get in this video, but this is what happens when I don't write a script. Yeah. I guess fuck that professor though. Anyway, thank you guys so very much for coming to this episode of Manny and Manuscripts and hanging out with me. Let me know in the comment section down below if you like this sort of thing, this is the sort of video you want to see, the sort of content that you want to see. I'm kind of playing around with what kind of content I want to produce. I don't know if this is going to be the kind of video that I do, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But if you like this video, be sure to like this video, leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, make sure that you subscribe for more content similar to this and also different from this. And also make sure that you hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on any of my videos, because YouTube and their algorithm is wonky. And we are also on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So, you know, every subscriber counts and you count. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel for more crazy literary madness. Also, down in my description box below is all sorts of links to my social media, Poorly Lit Pod on Twitter and Poorly Lit Books on Instagram, as well as my Goodreads and my Ko-fi. So if you want to support me in any way, you can definitely donate to me on my Ko-fi down there in the description box. Also, there are links to Black Lives Matter organizations still down there, permanent fixture in my description box, as well as links to different trans organizations and to help support them in any way that you can. Again, super helpful, permanent fixture in my description box. Thank you guys once again for all of your love and support I've seen on these videos. It makes me cry every time. It gets me so emotional because I just love you guys so much, and I'm so excited to take you guys on this journey with me. I am not gonna cry on camera. You can't make me. I'm not ruining my makeup. Always remember and never forget that you are the source of your own happiness, and you are lovely and beautiful all the way down to your soul, and that you are loved by people even if you haven't met them yet. So I will see you guys next week for another BookTube video. So love you guys. Bye lovelies, bye gems.